The supermarkets and takeaway chains have, until now, held back from voicing fears about Brexit. They didn't want to alienate customers who'd voted to leave. But with the distinct possibility tonight of a no-deal departure in just 60 days' time, Marks & Spencer, Waitrose, KFC, the Co-op and others have joined forces to warn of the effects of delays at ports. Price rises and empty shelves will follow, they say, and Eurotunnel has warned it still needs to know from the government what sort of checks it will need for trucks to keep running through the Channel Tunnel. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has this.
A new, sharply worded letter signed by the likes of Sainsbury's, M&S and McDonald's has warned that supermarket shelves will be left empty if the country crashes out of Europe. The warning makes clear that in March the situation will become even more acute as UK produce is out of season, meaning up to 90% of lettuces, tomatoes and soft fruit is reliant on imports from the continent. In the letter, some of Britain's biggest retailers say they're extremely concerned that their customers will be among the first to experience the realities of a no-deal Brexit. They warn of significant risks to maintaining the choice and quality that customers have come to expect. And they say there will be inevitable pressure on food prices from higher transport costs, currency devaluation and tariffs.
The purpose of the letter is to really highlight the risks to consumers of a no-deal Brexit. We really need to ensure that that is avoided at all costs to make sure that we can all continue to get fresh food on our shelves and maintain low prices for consumers.
Tonight, one supermarket boss whose company is included in the letter told me he worried that today's politics had moved beyond the purely rational. Supermarkets' just-in-time deliveries all rely on road transport, and a massive chunk of it goes through here, Eurotunnel in Folkestone.
The stuff that's going through here now goes into our manufacturing industries, it's just-in-time deliveries, it's the foodstuffs on the shelves, it's medicines. So it covers the whole economy. It's £120 billion worth of goods every year. And if it's not clear how we're going to be operating this business in the future, all of that is at risk.
Every hour, Eurotunnel carries 500 trucks between Britain and the continent, carrying an astonishing £120 billion worth of goods a year. That's 25% of all UK trade with Europe. How damaging is it for businesses not having clarity?
Uncertainty has been the worst effect of this whole Brexit negotiation. The moment the governments get rid of uncertainty and give us clarity on the direction that they're taking is the moment that we can really settle down and deliver things.
Do you think that haulage firms know what to expect?
That's one of the big challenges. The problem across the industry is huge. The lack of knowledge across the industry is one of the most worrying things. Nobody knows what to tell the industry to prepare for.
The man who heads up the UK's Road Haulage Association says the government is in denial about the amount of information needed by truck drivers and is being complacent about the risks.
I don't believe they really do understand the scale of the challenge. The complacency has been around customs believing that their bit takes 6 seconds. It's the hours of work that has to be done to get that information into customs that is the problem.
The negotiation process has been very long and very torturous, and it's not been clear at any stage throughout the last 2 years what the end result would be. And that means we've had to invest an enormous amount of money, and that's not a good way to do business.
How expensive has it been?
For the moment, it's millions of pounds worth of expenditure.
Tens of millions?
Tens is fair.
20 million?
Tens of millions has been spent so far just preparing for the worst case, and tens of millions that we hope won't be necessary.
Companies like Eurotunnel are angry that Brexit has sucked the oxygen out of much of the economy and meant wasting huge sums of money on preparations that may prove pointless. Business bosses will hope for clarity from tomorrow's vote, but given the divisions in Parliament, they are likely to end up disappointed.
Helia Ebrahimi reporting now. Theresa May has told a meeting of Conservative backbenchers that they should instruct the government to renegotiate the Northern Ireland backstop when they vote on amendments to her Brexit deal again tomorrow. She's hoping that if she can show Brussels that the Commons would back her deal without the backstop, they might think again. But in Brussels this afternoon, the EU's Brexit negotiator said that there were no alternatives to the backstop and that EU leaders would not reopen the withdrawal agreement. And it's not clear that ardent Brexiteers in her own party are prepared to follow her plan either. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
We've been waiting ever since Theresa May's thumping defeat in the House of Commons 2 weeks ago to find out what her plan B was. We got little signals about it, long silences, little signals. Tonight, she's kind of given us the strongest indication yet. She's been standing up in front of Tory MPs in there, and she said what she wants them to do is back an amendment, which is to be debated on, voted on tomorrow, we think, which calls for alternative arrangements to the backstop arrangement, which is in the withdrawal agreement. Now, that's something Theresa May for ages has said can't actually be done. It's all sort of there locked in. So a little way down the corridor, not far away from where she was telling Tory MPs that, there was a meeting of the European Research Group of MPs, the pro-Brexit group, made up a lot of the numbers of the people who voted down her agreement, and they said they're not going to back that amendment. So no sooner had she announced a plan B than it seems to have died a bit of a death. One other thing that was happening in that meeting, Boris Johnson piped up and said, well, how can we know what it is you're talking about? Tell us what it is you actually intend to do on Northern Ireland. And she fired back at him, well, you won't find out unless you back me. And that's the kind of response which is failing to galvanise support. Over in Brussels, as you were saying, the chief official who does a lot of the negotiating has been giving a very rare few public utterances, and Sabine Veil said that it looked increasingly likely that Britain might crash out of the EU, and the point she kept making in her question and answer session in Brussels was what they are looking for right now is certainty about the British government's position on Brexit. Well, on a night like this, good luck with that.
On the eve of critical Commons votes, the UK's chief Brexit negotiator, Ollie Robbins, wasn't answering questions.
Can the withdrawal agreement be changed?
He hummed a tune. His counterpart in Brussels took a different approach. Sabine Veil has been at the Brexit negotiating table every step of the way. She's tipped to lead the EU when negotiating on a future relationship actually starts. 2 weeks after the thumping defeat for Theresa May's Brexit divorce deal in the Commons, Sabine Veil's frustrations with her British counterparts spilled out.
Our impression from here is that the discussion in London at the moment is much more about the future of the country and the future of the EU-UK relationship than it is just about the content of the withdrawal agreement. In fact, a lot of the discussion is uninhibited by any knowledge of what is actually in the withdrawal agreement.
She mocked the exact amendment, the Brady Amendment, which Theresa May was about to give her backing to in Westminster.
So the problem with the Brady Amendment is it doesn't spell out what alternative arrangements are. We haven't found them, and the UK negotiators have not been able to explain to us. And that's no criticism of them, because they don't exist. So I think we've collectively done our best, but...
She signalled Brussels would engage with Theresa May if she could prove she had solid backing in Parliament.
There's no point beating about the bush. The withdrawal agreement was defeated with a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons. That is a crushing defeat by any standards. And we need to have a majority which does not just get the withdrawal agreement over the hurdle of the meaningful vote by a narrow margin, but we need to have a stable majority which is there to ensure the ratification, but also all the internal legislation that the UK will have to do. So that is quite a big challenge. And the negotiation on this is in London. There's no negotiation between the EU and the UK. That negotiation is finished.
As the Prime Minister tries to convince MPs she can get a majority together for her deal, waspish scepticism from Brussels. Theresa May has been seeing more figures from her own party today. A brief attempt at cross-party talks quickly faded.
We discussed all sorts of things. The PM was in very good form, I can say that much. Do you know who I am?
He's a Tory MEP. The Prime Minister and her team are focused on trying to scrape the Conservative Party back together again.
What did the Prime Minister have to say?
Well, it would be wrong of me to tell you what the Prime Minister had to say.
Theresa May's been trying to lure pro-Brexit rebels like Ian Duncan-Smith to back her deal by promising she might be able to soften the backstop in ways she had said were impossible.
It is a bit baffling to people.
Well, it shouldn't be baffling that a negotiation sort of continues until it either succeeds or fails. We are in the last knockings of this negotiation.
So the extra pressure might do it this time because of the ticking clock. Well, Europe might give us something that Theresa May herself has said they won't.
Well, they've said that they're not going to change, but if they don't change, then there's not going to be a deal that gets through the House of Commons. And since it is in everyone's interest to get a deal, and since also, let's be honest, there's a history in European negotiations of things going absolutely to the last minute. Well, we are now approaching the last minute. March the 29th is the last minute. We're nearly in February, so I think minds will be focused and concentrated in ways that they perhaps haven't been in the past.
And that appears to be Theresa May's hope as she swept into Parliament tonight. The EU will soften more than they say, and Tory MPs will come into line scared of losing Brexit altogether.
Many of us always thought that the EU was more likely to move as we came closer to the end point of the negotiations. And in fact, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit more flexibility from some on the EU negotiating side.
But tonight, pro-Brexit Tory MPs said Sir Graham Brady's amendment didn't rewrite the Brexit deal enough. And they appeared to kill off Theresa May's latest strategy, even as she was launching it down the corridor. Does this feel like a last throw of the dice?
Well, the last four throws of the dice have felt like the last throw of the dice, and what we discover is that until we get to March the 29th, there might always be another chance.
Might be, might not. One cabinet minister said he expected all the amendments with real teeth tomorrow to fail. And Theresa May, he said, would simply say she was ploughing on anyway.
Well, now with me here is the Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen, a long-standing Brexit supporter and a member of the European Research Group. Andrew Bridgen, will you be backing Mrs May tomorrow?
Well, Sir Graham made a pitch at the 1922 committee meeting, which the Prime Minister attended, pushing his amendment, and I'm struggling to support it. Although it says it'll get rid of the backstop, it says to replace it with alternative arrangements without specifying what those alternative arrangements might be.
I was rather hoping you'd tell me what they're going to be.
We weren't told what they would be, and I don't think anyone knows what they're going to be.
Do you think she knows what they're going to be?
And it also presumes that the only problem I have with the withdrawal agreement is the backstop. I also have concerns over the £39 billion, which we're not paying for a deal, we're paying to talk about a future deal. I also have concerns about the legal future relationship protocol, which it's clear to me when you read it that the EU's idea of our future relationship is very, very similar to the backstop.
Well, now, if you're not going to back Mrs May, and you aren't, it seems, coming up with any other amendment, I'm just wondering whether you subscribe to the view, then, that we are going to crash out without a deal.
We wouldn't be crashing out, we would be cashing in. We've been in the European Union for 47 years.
Well, even if you cash in, you have to crash out before you cash in.
We could leave on WTO, immediately offer under GATT, Article 24, 5C, I believe it is, a free trade agreement, talks, which would entitle us for up to 10 years to secure those talks. And while we did that, we could have tariff-free and quota-free trade with the European Union. That would be a very generous offer. But for the first time in 47 years, on the 29th of March at 11 p.m, the cell door is open. And what we need is politicians with the courage and the backing of the British people to walk through that door, John.
Well, that's the moment at which they throw the key away and we're in the cell.
The negotiations will go down to the wire. That's why we've got a wire. At the last minute, the 11th hour, the EU will blink and offer us better terms than we'll get now.
Where do you get that from?
Because that's the way the EU operate. They will be taken down to the wire. They'll have to see the whites of our eyes and believe that we're going to leave on no deal to drop the backstop completely and renegotiate on the £39 billion.
Aren't you running the risk that we may not leave at all?
The Prime Minister was very clear, we're leaving the European Union. She realises that we've been mandated for that in this Parliament, and the devastating effect not leaving would have on the future electoral prospects of the Conservative Party and the devastating effect it would have on our democracy if we didn't deliver.
Now, some of the most prestigious names on the high street, Waitrose, Co-op, all sorts of shops are warning that we will run out of fresh fruit, fresh vegetables and much else.
I worked for 22 years in the fruit and vegetable industry before I came to Parliament. You remember in 2015 we had over 20 days consecutive of strikes and disruption at the Channel ports due to French action. We didn't run out of fruit and vegetables or medicines.
It wasn't February, it wasn't midwinter.
We've had a declaration again from the President of the Port of Calais saying they're all ready. The percentage of lorries that will be stopped if we applied third-party rules, which I don't believe we will for the first few months, is 3% of vehicles. That's about 4 lorries an hour would have to be checked.
Andrew Bridgen, thank you very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Westminster, where Theresa May has been urging her MPs to back an amendment that she hopes could reopen discussions with the EU about the Northern Irish backstop. The amendment, tabled by Sir Graham Brady, states that Parliament would be willing to support her withdrawal agreement so long as the backstop is replaced with what it calls alternative arrangements to avoid a hard border. I'm sorry about the language you can hear off stage. That's just one of those things in this situation. Sir Graham Brady himself joins us now. Sir Graham, these alternative arrangements to the backstop, what are they?
Well, we've deliberately left that open, but the phrase was one that was used by Michel Barnier, the EU chief negotiator himself, and that's been picked up, and we're offering that then to the government and to the EU side as a way of trying to resolve an impasse. And crucially, when the withdrawal agreement was voted down 2 weeks ago, people said this is such a huge majority, it can't possibly make any progress. But I always believed that with a crucial change, the end of the backstop being guaranteed, so that it couldn't become permanent, it's possible you can get a majority in the House of Commons.
In a sense, that only makes sense if these alternative arrangements are credible. And nobody, literally nobody, seems to be able to spell out what they are.
Well, there are several different models that are being offered. Lots of people have put suggestions together. The crucial thing is that both sides, the British government, the Irish government, but also the British government and the EU partners, are all determined to ensure that the Irish border remains open.
But tonight, even while you were deliberating with Mrs May, the deputy to Monsieur Barnier said Britain is about to crash out. Quite literally, that is what we're on course for.
I heard that.
Without a deal.
And that's precisely what my amendment is seeking to address, to make sure that there is a compromise that can be adopted by the House of Commons, that the government can progress, that we can move out of the deadlock that has been afflicting British politics for too long already.
Do you have Boris Johnson? Do you have the ERG?
I read Boris Johnson's article in the Daily Telegraph this morning, and I heard him earlier making some very positive contributions about the amendment. So I'm hoping that we will have Boris's support. I think many colleagues are weighing up their options, trying to decide what the best way forward is.
Well, George Osborne, in his Standard article today, said all this is a fantasy, and he has absolutely condemned what's going on.
Well, and George Osborne, of course, has been as helpful as he possibly can be at every point during this process, and I'd expect nothing else from my former constituency neighbour. But I think this really can demonstrate that there is a solution, and it answers, really importantly, it answers the EU's often quoted objection. Why should we come to the table? Why should we be prepared to move when we don't know what you could get through Parliament?
The odds of you getting this through?
Well, I'm hopeful. We've got the government supporting it now. I hope the DUP will come on board. And I've been talking to some Labour MPs who might be supporting it as well.
Sir Graham, thank you for braving the noise down there. And that's it. After the break, what room for manoeuvre does Mrs May have on the Northern Irish border issue? And what do the Irish make of the possibility of renegotiation? Welcome back to Westminster, where Theresa May is pinning her hopes tonight on returning to Brussels to secure changes in the Irish backstop, despite Ireland and the EU negotiators saying talks cannot be restarted. We asked a friend from Ireland to explain the backstop and how it has twisted Anglo-Irish relations.
The Irish backstop was agreed by the EU. And yes, by the Prime Minister, and was signed off by all in November's withdrawal agreement. And we know what happened to that.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
So what is this backstop? If there is no future trade deal signed by December 2022, then the backstop applies to trade between the UK and the EU across the Irish border. The whole of the UK becomes a single customs territory with no tariffs. That then avoids the hard border checks which would be needed under EU rules if the UK left the single market and customs union. Many of your Brexiteers and the Democratic Unionists dislike it because the UK and EU have to agree together to end it. And their fear is being trapped in the EU forever. But what's the problem with a hard border? Well, remember those 30 years of the Troubles. When peace was signed in the Good Friday Agreement, all sides agreed to remove the border security checks. And that was approved by, oh yes, a referendum both north and south of the border. The Irish border has been an issue for years. When it was agreed in London in 1921, it led to a civil war, and it didn't end well for Michael Collins, the Irish negotiator who signed it off. Today, Brexiteers are dismissing the border issue as bogus. Many in Ireland say one of them, Priti Patel, seems to have forgotten the devastating Irish famine when she suggested economic hardship be used as political leverage. And on Saturday, the BBC's John Humphreys, in a somewhat unique approach to Irish history, posed the question, should Dublin leave the EU and tag along with the UK? Really, John? There are 60 days until Brexit.
Thanks, Irish friend. Now, one man who thinks he can steer us out of the quagmire is former Conservative chairman Lord Maurice Saatchi. His private member's bill in the House of Lords would see the UK stay in the European Union, with us renegotiating membership terms so that they're more acceptable to pro-Brexit voters. When I spoke to him earlier, I began by asking him to explain how his plan would work.
What we're trying to say is lead, not leave. And I've introduced this bill in the House of Lords today, which it's one page, not 585 pages, and it contains our terms for remaining. There are only two clauses. One, we will have equal voting rights to Germany. We will not be a subordinate. We will not be a junior figure. Clause 2 is that, equally simple, we must have reasonable control of immigration. This doesn't mean that we're against immigration. It means that we'd like to have reasonable control of immigration. These are only two clauses. If such a thing was to pass, I believe that we, Gina Miller, Baroness Kennedy and I, believe that might have a chance of healing the incredible division in the nation, because we would have something we actually want.
But in a period where, frankly, there's so much in the air, that hasn't got much of a chance, has it?
Well, I don't know, because it's now up to the EU. The EU is going to Angela Merkel and their team in Brussels. They'll see what this bill is. And haven't we heard so many times? They say, we're so sad about Britain leaving. We're in tears. We're very sorry about you leaving. Well, let's find out if those are crocodile tears or real tears.
What do you say to the result of the referendum?
I say to the result of the referendum that a referendum is completely different from a general election. In a general election, one vote is enough. We all agree that. No general election result is ever challenged. That's because we all know, don't we, that in 5 years, if we don't like the result, we can change our mind. In this referendum, that's not possible. What we, the people, decided in that referendum is we're not sure. We can't decide. That was the result of the referendum.
Now, you were chairman of the Conservative Party at the time of Margaret Thatcher.
I was indeed.
Would Margaret Thatcher have taken us out of the European Union?
I'm asked all the time, what would Thatcher do? And I'm never able to answer. All I can say is that I don't believe that we would be in the position that we're in now. I don't think she could ever have accepted a situation in which we, Britain, are not one of the leading powers of Europe. It's completely unacceptable for us to be in a position, I'm sure she would say. Whatever happens with this withdrawal agreement tomorrow, that will never heal the rift in the nation. Never mind the Conservative Party. It will not be able to do that. What we're proposing will do that because it's what people actually want. This is not Remain. This is not pro-Remain. This is, to give it a name, let's call it Remain Plus. So these are our terms for remaining. In other words, we're saying to the people in Brussels and to Angela Merkel, President Macron, you keep saying you're in tears about us leaving. Right. Okay, so what are you offering for us to stay? It's very simple.